Welcome to the Schulich Leader podcast. My name is Kenzie Collins, and I'm a 2016 Schulich Leader at the University of Waterloo. I finished up my undergraduate degree there in 2021, and I'll talk a little bit about what I've done since then. But Liam, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, so I'm Liam. I am a 2013 Schulich Leader at McMaster University, and then I have since gone on to do a master's at Waterloo, and then now I'm doing my PhD at U of T currently in medical biophysics.
Cool. So yeah, I think I can just start by kind of going over my path so far in terms of like academics and also some other things. I started, as I mentioned, I started my undergrad at Waterloo in 2016, but I'm originally from Newfoundland and from a small town there of only about 6,000 people, but that's where I grew up. And so moving away from me was a pretty big deal back in 2016, kind of upping and moving to Ontario and to Waterloo, but no regrets at all. It was an incredible experience. And I did my undergrad in biomedical engineering there. And kind of throughout my undergrad, had a lot of different co-op experiences, which I think is pretty, it's pretty common for those of us who went to Waterloo. But I really tried to get them as broadly as possible in terms of both research and company type positions. Wanted to make sure I tried it all before I decided what I was doing moving forward. And then now currently I'm in the MD PhD joint program at Queen's. So I am doing my medical degree along with my PhD in biomedical engineering within the mechanical and materials engineering department. So still sticking with that kind of engineering route, but adding in that kind of interdisciplinary portion there where I get to actually be working with physicians and eventually being a physician myself, but then having that clinician-scientist route as well, where I can continue my research in engineering and kind of encourage collaboration between the two fields. Yeah, and you?
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, so my own path, I grew up in Vancouver, so also not up in Ontario. Yeah, and I got the Schulich Scholarship to McMaster, and so I came to Ontario and moved to Hamilton, and yeah, I did engineering physics at McMaster, so I was always interested in physics, but then I wanted to get some education in the practical side as well. So I sort of took the middle route there, and then I had always had a sense that I wanted to work in research. So, near the end of that degree, I applied to different master's programs and decided to go to Waterloo to do control systems there. So that's more sort of mathematical, more free theory, yeah. And then at the end of that, I, had decided I wanted to pursue a PhD, keep doing more graduate school. I found research interesting. I really enjoyed teaching. But I wanted to do something, more in the medical space, more applied. And so I came to do medical biophysics at U of T, which is maybe a bit closer to what I was doing in my undergrad. So again, maybe a similar sort of idea of like doing something on the intersection of engineering and medicine. So I guess, I'm interested in like hearing about your particular like thesis project or your what you're working on now, and if does it have any relationship to what you were doing like in your undergrad, or is it sort of on a different track?
Yeah. So, I mean, a bit of both. I spent several of my co-op work terms at the Toronto Rehabilitation Institute in downtown Toronto. And there I worked a lot on accessibility challenges in terms of kind of, I guess, stairs and older adults, as well as things like grab bars and more things in the built physical environment, and how we can make these things more accessible. So we did a lot of testing of individuals falling down the stairs and understanding their biomechanics and doing tests on different grab bars or hand bars that they might use as they're entering and exiting a bathtub, for instance. And I did that research somewhere in my second year and ended up going back a second time and just loved it. I really liked that everything that we did, we took back to kind of the Canadian standards, and would present them to the government and try to make changes to our building codes to make sure that anything that we discovered or that we learned had like a tangible positive impact. And I loved that research. And so I tried a few other things. I tried tissue engineering. I had a company job, just to make sure, but it became pretty clear pretty fast that I was really interested in participant-based research and accessibility. So when I came to Queen's and I got into this program, I discovered Dr. Claire Davies, and she's my supervisor here, and she focuses very specifically on assistive technology. So I was really interested in that because it kind of builds off that accessibility portion. And I've always been interested in working with kids as well. It's kind of funny because I worked with older adults and then now I've switched to the other end and I'm working with kids. But I love working with kids. So I decided to kind of head down that route. And what I'm working on now, so my thesis project is focused on building an emotion recognition system for children or youth with cerebral palsy, and through just eye tracking motions. So the idea or the goal, whether or not it's going to be possible yet, is still time will tell. But the idea is that we want to be able to use these different eye movements, whether that be the saccades or the velocity or their pupil dilation, and use those movements and use machine learning to interpret them and be able to help them convey their emotional experiences to individuals who don't necessarily understand them. Because they can't necessarily convey in what we deem the typical manner, but that doesn't mean they can't convey their emotions. So it gives us a really great kind of opportunity to use this physiological signal, and kind of repurpose it and try to use it to provide them with a means of communication.
Well, yeah, that's great. So is that, I guess it's different from just trying to communicate words. When you say communicate emotions, like, will they use their eye movements to say whether they're happy or angry, or is that,
exactly. Yeah, because when we talk about things like communication boards and such, obviously the long-term goal is to be able to use that for individuals who have trouble kind of expressing themselves even using these devices. But right now we're working with individuals who use assistive communication technologies. So whether that be like an iPad with a communication board, or something along those lines that can help them communicate. How can we make that experience kind of smoother, improve it, find ways to make sure that their caregiver or their friend or their teacher or their physician knows how they're feeling and what emotion that they've been experiencing.
Right. Oh, that's an awesome project.
Thanks. And I think you have two theses now. So you have the master's, which was very controls based, yeah?
Yeah.
And then now right. U of T is a bit of a switch.
Yeah, it's a bit of a change. Yeah, maybe I'll just focus on the U of T one for now. Yeah, so I basically work up at Sunnybrook, or that's where my supervisor is based out of, and we focus on this machine called the MR Linac. So it's this combined MRI scanner and device for radiation therapy to treat cancers. And so the idea is that typically radiation treatment is planned up front. So patients are imaged and with CT and sometimes MRI for certain tumor sites, and in particular, like the brain is where we focus. And then they have a radiation treatment plan designed, so where the radiation occurs, and then that's sort of delivered over many sessions. But there are some difficulties with that approach, being that things can change inside of the body, like in particular in the abdomen, and tumors can grow or shrink. And so it's advantageous to be able to adapt the treatment to any of those changes. And so the idea with combining these two machines is that you can scan patients before every treatment and update the targeting that way, based on like the current anatomy or the current shape of the tumor. So we're exploring basically different types of images. There are many different sort of imaging sequences you can acquire using MRI, and they tell you different things about the anatomy or about the biology of the tumor or the normal tissues. And so we're trying to understand how we can best use these additional, more sort of research sequences now and sort of translate them and use them clinically in order to guide the targeting of the beam, or whether we increase or decrease the dose to certain areas. So that's sort of the broad overview of our lab, and then my particular project focuses on one type of MRI for this sort of radiation treatment guidance. It's called diffusion MRI, and it measures the sort of cell level structure that you can measure of tumors or of healthy tissue for guiding the treatment of brain cancers. So that's sort of, in a nutshell, my thesis focus.
Interesting. Have you, I guess, in your lab in general, I assume you work with physicians, but have you actually implemented a lot of these ideas like in practice? Have you been able to work with patients yet, or is that something? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we haven't, like all of the stuff that we're doing right now is at the research stage.
Okay.
But where, like I should say, patients are being treated on this machine, and yeah, so the data that we get comes from these patients being, they're treated, and they have certain scans to define the like the tumor targeting. But there are also these additional like research sequences we acquire. So right now we're analyzing those images to figure out how to best use them. And then the idea is in the future, those could potentially be like incorporated into the actual treatment planning.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, it always starts kind of in the research phase, and then you get to the application part. So in terms of, I guess, that project and working at Sunnybrook, how did you get there? Because I think one of the big things that we all have to do when we're trying to pick a graduate school, or if we decide to go to graduate school, is, where do you go? What do you want to pursue? Who do you want to be working with? Mm-hmm. How did you make those decisions?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So for U of T, at least, it was actually my old master's supervisor who got me onto this program, this medical biophysics program. Yeah, we were sort of discussing different options for me for after graduating, and he had told me, he was interested in this when he was looking where to go after his undergrad, actually. And so I looked into the program, and I thought, the research looked like very interesting, and they had an open house, so I went and visited some of the labs. I did apply to the program, did some interviews, and got to know it more that way. And then in terms of a supervisor, it's a bit different in medical biophysics. You don't come in with a supervisor. You actually are just accepted into the program, and you do rotations for the first semester. Yeah, so you do these short placements in 3 different labs, and then you can decide afterwards which lab you'd like to remain in permanently. So and I actually didn't even know my supervisor coming into the program. I just met him through like a faculty student social event. So it was kind of organic in a way, but we just we got along quite well, and I found his research really interesting, and so that's how I ended up in the lab that I'm in currently. And how about you? What sort of guided your decision to go to Queens?
And so I mean, I kind of figured out I wanted to do the MD PhD program, so then it was kind of like looking specifically for me, as I knew I wanted my research to be in biomedical engineering. When looking at schools, Waterloo doesn't have a medical school. They have an excellent biomed program, but they don't have a medical school. So I wanted to be somewhere where I was closer to a medical school, preferably somewhere that had one pretty much attached or really nearby. So I mean, there are lots of options for that. And then for me, I kind of just applied broadly. Had a few kind of different options in terms of medical school, but in terms of MD PhD, this was my option, which ended up working out great for me because they had a supervisor I was really interested in working with. That was also something that I was very specific about, is I only applied to schools where there were researchers doing the type of research that I'm interested in doing. And also making sure that there were supervisors in the Biomed Eng area that were also looking at accessibility, whether that be in, some form, but that's what I was interested in looking at, like improving access. So in terms of, specific supervisors, I actually spoke to my supervisor, Claire, before I entered the program and like made sure we kind of connected and that we got along well. I think the number one piece of advice someone's given me in terms of picking a supervisor or a lab is that you need to like them, because you're going to be spending a lot of time there. You want to have good rapport. You want to feel comfortable coming to them when you have a question or a concern. And so I think for me, that was one of the big things. And kind of like you said, it happened organically that you ended up with the current prof that you're working with. I think that was one of like the key things I was looking for when I was trying to identify a supervisor. So yeah, for me, that was kind of the connection there, just focusing on like what my goal was in terms of the research, and then making sure I connected with the lab and the supervisor. That worked well for me personally.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense and sort of resonates with advice that I heard when I was asking about how do you choose a supervisor, how do you exactly. So and so in terms of coming into grad school after you picked it, like what have you found, I guess, most challenging about that transition from undergrad to grad?
Yeah. I think for me, it's been, well, I guess imposter syndrome is one big thing.
Yeah.
I think that I came into this, and I mean, I started on my PhD right away. So I don't have a master's. So it was definitely a learning curve in terms of figuring out how to be a graduate student and how to be a researcher. I'd had those experiences through my co-op, which is why I was so certain that this is the route I want to go. But I hadn't had the experience of having kind of my own master's project and knowing where to start and picking a project and scoping out a project for my very bizarre timeline in MD PhD. So I think for me, that was like the biggest challenge. And the other aspect of that would be kind of further up in academia as well, in terms of like being a woman in mechanical engineering. We're not a huge large number of us, so It was kind of different for me to try to get used to this idea of being in a very male dominated field. I was a little bit sheltered from it at Waterloo in the sense that we actually had more women than men in my undergrad program. So switching into this graduate program where I am definitely more so in like the minority, being a woman, was definitely different and an experience to kind of shift my brain. And it's kind of like putting your, getting ready to stand up for yourself and making sure your voice is heard. And there's a lot of great allies, both male and female, in all spots, but it's definitely been kind of a shift for me, is recognizing that this is the field I'm in, and it's growing and it's improving, but there's still some challenges there with that as well.
Yeah.
And for you?
Yeah, for me, I guess I would say the transition to much more independent sort of learning and work. Which can be, it's quite exciting being able to do your own project and, take things in the direction that you want. But obviously there's a lot of challenges with that too, because, in particular, when you're doing research, like, there's no guarantee that what you're going to try is going to work out or that it's even feasible. And so, and your supervisor provides guidance, but they can't necessarily tell you, what to do one way or another. So I think that was, quite different from the undergrad experience where, you're taking courses and it's pretty clear, the kind of milestones that you have to hit at each stage. So I think, I think that would be the main challenge that I encountered. And then the other one was, just I guess staying connected to the graduate community, I think, is quite important. I think in undergrad, things tend to be set up, a little easier to, connect with your peers and see people. Whereas, yeah, in grad school, sometimes you need to make, I think, a bit more of an effort to, to sort of establish those sort of social connections, which can be really important. But,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
definitely true. I've definitely seen that as well in terms of like just I have my MD PhD program, which is smaller, which has been nice. But in terms of, the engineering graduate program, it's huge, and there aren't as many opportunities to necessarily kind of get together, have that social aspect, like you said, like there was an undergrad. So I think it can be a bit isolating until you kind of figure out where you fit and where kind of your peers and your colleagues are. Because yeah, I can definitely see that too. It's not as structured, that social time.
Yeah. I definitely see that. And would you say you've like, of those challenges you identified, have you do you feel like you've like learned ways of sort of navigating them, or do you feel like you're still kind
Yeah.
of in the process of figuring that out? Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, imposter syndrome, I feel like it's always going to be there a little bit. But it's kind of just remembering like, yeah, I don't know. I know where I want to be and what I'm going for. And I need to just not compare to other people and make sure I'm staying on my own path and my own plan. And then, yeah, in terms of dealing with being a woman in STEM, I think that's like the biggest thing I've learned, I think, is just, like I said, recognizing allies in the room. And I think that's huge. It's just taking a moment to look around and just be like, even if you're experiencing something that's not positive at the moment, to realize that there's someone on your right or someone 2 rows behind you who is there for you and who is like, yeah, I agree with what you're saying and thank you for saying it, kind of thing. So I think that's been huge. And I always like to specify kind of, my allies aren't necessarily women or cis women, even like it could be anybody, right, who's an ally in the so I think that's like really important. Some of my greatest like allies I've had since coming here have been the men and the women in my lab who have just been really supportive. So it's really great to see both sides of that as well.
Yeah, definitely. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So I know that you've won CGSM and CGSD, which is awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So I think
won the Vanier. That's
thank you.
Pretty incredible. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. I think these scholarships, and I mean the Schulich as well, always have kind of this rap of being, hard to get, and you got to get your applications in and all these little aspects. And I mean, they are as well, but I think kind of the intimidation aspect is often there. So it's kind of like filling out the applications can be a bit scary. So I don't know, what kind of advice would you have, that you've taken into these applications that you think has like either made them successful or just made them very representative of yourself, I guess?
I mean, I guess for each of the applications, like if there's a section writing on your sort of career goals and your ideas for the future, I think it is important to sort of connect how the scholarship and how the program is going to like help you to reach those future goals. And that'll be particular for each person. Like no one person is going to have, or not everyone is going to have the same reason for wanting to go to graduate school or wanting to do an MD PhD, for example. So I think being able to sort of highlight your personal motivations for that is quite important. And then I guess when it comes to the research proposal that you have to write, I think it helps to get guidance from like a supervisor or a mentor or something, and just how to structure that, and how to write something that is succinct, isn't overly complicated, but is also appears to be a substantial enough project. And I think those would be kind of my two main sort of things to think about when actually writing the application. I don't know if you had anything to add on to that, or
I mean, you hit definitely in terms of getting advice. That was one of the big things I would say as well, was I got as many eyes as possible on my applications to not just read for proofread, yes, but also to get kind of opinions on what I should include, what I shouldn't include. And that's not to say I took everybody's opinions either. I think that's also an important thing to learn, is that when you ask 80, and I'm obviously not 80, but if you ask a ton of people for advice on your applications, not just being thankful for the advice, but recognizing who's to take and who's not to take, and being okay with that, because you're going to have conflicting advice and all these different things. So really it's okay to get as much advice as you can, and if you have to throw a third or a half of it out, then that's life. But I think advice is never a bad thing, and getting more perspectives. And then, I think the other thing that someone said to me once in terms of these applications is to just focus on kind of what matters to you. You read so many applications where you kind of you use your essays to list all the things that you already listed in, the CV system. Which is just, it's not really necessary, right? I feel like your essay in a lot of these places are how you show what matters to you and what's important. And so even if that's not the flashy thing on the resume, it's a really great kind of opportunity to show them what you care about and what matters to you and why. And I think that those are kind of the more impactful essays than the ones that just list XYZ. It's better to kind of give the background. So I think those would be, my two kind of comments, but definitely agree on both of those.
I really like what you were saying about not just sort of listing, sort of rehashing the points of your resume, but it's a space to provide a bit more of your sort of personal story or motivation.
It's context, right? It's like it's your chance to explain yourself, not use a one sentence to explain something, right? It's
exactly
where you get to show who you are, which is what's important.
I absolutely agree. So, I guess moving on to the next sort of question we've got here. What's been the biggest challenge you've had to face? So I guess before we were talking about kind of transition from graduate to undergraduate, which is one sort of subset of challenges. But I guess overall, are there other challenges that you've faced that you thought would be fun to highlight?
Definitely, I guess kind of same idea as the previous ones. And then the other one I would say is time management for me. And I have, question I can ask you about that later. But in terms of, just finding the time to get everything done, while also maintaining a healthy lifestyle in terms of mental health and social aspects, and learning not to just say no to everything social, but also learning to say no to some of the extra work stuff in terms of, it's a balance, right? I think that's been the hardest thing for me is learning that I can't say yes to everything, and have to keep that balance in my life.
No, I agree. I still struggle with saying yes to too many things. I think sometimes it's a problem that doesn't go away. And just to the point of making sure that you're not I guess overextending yourself in sort of work related activities, but making space for time to rest or like time to socialize.
And I guess I'll kind of ask you this now though, but like that's something I've experienced kind of over and over again, is maintaining that balanced lifestyle, time managing, because as you mentioned before, it's very unstructured being in a PhD for a lot of it. So making sure you're kind of like meeting deadlines, but realistic deadlines, and making sure you're not spending all your time in the lab and also have a social life. Like, you've experienced that, but how have you been able to kind of keep track with the timelines for the degrees and still kind of maintain that balance outside of school? Like, have you developed mechanisms for that? Because I'm still looking for some. So I always like to ask this.
I guess it's hard to give like a like top 5 tips of like time management
Yeah.
organization. I mean, everyone
So
has their own
personal too.
things, but yeah, it tends to be personal. But I mean, I guess yeah, I'd seen this question. I'd written down something, just a perspective that kind of stuck in my mind from that I heard in another panel discussion that I was listening to. Somebody who had like graduated with her PhD, and she was just saying that you kind of imagine that you have all these different like tasks to do, and it's like juggling a bunch of different balls. You try to keep them all in the air at the same time, and it's important to remember that some of the balls are made of rubber and they'll bounce, and some of the balls are made of glass and they'll shatter if they hit the ground. So it's just remembering that sometimes you won't be able to fit everything in that you want to get done, but there are some things that you can push back. A deadline might not be so hard. You can sort of go easy on one aspect if it means that you're sort of able to keep those glass balls in the air.
Yeah, I've never heard that. I like that
yeah.
though. The idea, yeah, the rubber, we can bounce back. It's like you get some stuff you get another shot at, and it's okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, that's a good comparison there.
So
Yeah.
yeah, and then I guess I mean it's kind of a similar idea, but sometimes it can be worthwhile to relax your timelines. Like I think it's easy to put a lot of pressure on yourself, get things like done by a certain time, and even I'm thinking even like whatever, doing your qualifying proposal in a PhD. I don't know if it's universal for all programs to do that,
Yeah.
but yeah, there's a certain like suggested timeline. But I know a lot of people, like including myself, who went a bit over that just because there's things outside of your control, things take longer than you expect, and yeah, it's not really worth sort of beating yourself up too much if you don't like hit exact timelines
Yeah.
and things. Yeah.
Yeah, that's also really true. That's something else that's kind of nice about PhDs, can be the flexibility in that, because
Mhm.
really there's a lot of things that you might be able to do from home, or if I do it in 2 weeks, it's not going to make a difference. You don't have that
Yeah.
essays due on Friday deadline kind of thing. Well, sometimes you do, I guess, but not most of
Yeah.
the time,
All the time.
which can be really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like what's the long-term career goal? What's your aim?
Yeah, for me, I would say community program is definitely like an academic career. Yeah, so the typical route for that is to do a PhD, and you go on and do postdoctoral fellowship typically, and so that'll be like it can be a 2 to 3 year placement somewhere where you're doing you have more sort of independent sort of research, working alongside again, principal investigator or professor. Yeah, and then eventually going on to apply to academic positions from there. Yeah, so that was my intent when coming into the program. But I'll also say that now I'm yeah, starting to explore other options as well. I mean, there are definitely lots of different sort of routes to go after a PhD. And there are advantages and disadvantages to sort of different uh, different possible paths afterwards. And so I'm also exploring the idea of maybe doing like an industrial postdoc, say, and so going and working more in collaboration with the company, and moving into the private sector possibly. So yeah, so those are kind of the two main routes, but I would say overall a position where I'm able to sort of do research and take advantage of all the schooling that I've benefited from. Yeah, would kind of be my ideal position. Yeah. And what about you? Do you have a particular specialty or a particular sort of field within medicine you'd like to go into?
To an extent, yeah. I mean, I know for sure what I want is to continue accessibility research from the lens of both an engineer and a physician. So I mean, the goal is clinician-scientists, have that protected time to do clinical work, but then also have my own research lab would be kind of the goal. I want the lab to really focus on collaboration between physicians and engineers, or med students and engineers, or anyone in the healthcare sector and engineers. The idea is to kind of encourage that collaboration, because I think we don't have enough of it. And so I think someone who would have kind of my degree and my position would be in a good spot to kind of make those connections happen. So for me, that's the goal, is the lab, the clinical practice, having that like very hands-on aspect of experiencing and identifying problems. I mean, and then you know this, but engineering, we always kind of talk about finding the right problem, right? And picking the problem. And I feel like I mean, I'll be in kind of a good position to identify some of those issues by seeing them firsthand. So yeah. And then in terms of specialties, I mean, my heart right now says peds because that's where I'm working. But at the same time, once I start doing clinical work and stuff and go into clerkship and have the chance to observe and to try these different specialties, who knows where I'm going to end up. But yeah, I'm fairly confident in the research aspect, the lens that I'm going to be looking at it from, whether that be peds or not, is up for grabs once I actually get the chance to experience it, for sure.
Yeah, of course, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure going through clerkship, you get exposure to a lot of things that maybe might open your perspective or not, or maybe that'll reinforce your
I think it's gonna be one or the other.
Right. For sure. Cool. So I guess you've sort of mentioned it a little bit, like for the MD PhD program, how is it structured, like at Queen's, and how is it? I guess, do you do your whole PhD first and then your MD, or do you sort of alternate, or years, or how does that all?
So I mean, in general, kind of the MD PhD program is meant to kind of combine the two. There's definitely been we need to make some improvements in a lot of the programs across the country to really make them collaborative and like very like, so you feel like you're doing both your PhD and your med degree. Right now, the way it works at Queen's, which is actually, I believe, different from any school across the country, is we do 2 years of our PhD. I'm in year 2 of my PhD now. And then in the fall, I'll begin 2 years of pre-clerkship. So my 2 years of like very classroom-based learning. And then I jump out for a year and I finish up and defend my PhD. And then I come back and I do my 2 clerkship years. So it's the 7 years, but it's weird because it's 2, 2, 1, 2. It's a jump in and out. And I can't speak to whether this is the ideal approach or not, because I mean, I haven't tried the other ones, but to me, I really love starting with my PhD. I think it's really great. I just wish I could also combine it a little bit more with the med, because when that was my goal in the first place, like I wanted to combine those 2 fields. So for me, I was like, it'd be really great if I would have a little bit more of a connection with the med school right now. But at the same time, if I started in med, I wouldn't be doing my research. So I don't know what the answer is, but it's an interesting approach. But I mean, at least I'm still in both, and I'm still kind of, over the next few years, I'll be able to start making those connections. So it's still kind of what I want in the long term.
For sure. And that's interesting, like that you come back. Like, are you still doing research for those 2 years you're in medical school at all, or
sort of. So the idea is that I would spend my summers on them, on my research full time for the most part, because a lot of med students take on research placements during the summer. So obviously mine would just be my own thesis. But then, I mean, during the year, it's kind of just recognized that I'm going to have to be spending a lot of time, just studying and focusing in on that. So it's going on, but the way I've also tried to, this has been a bit of the time managing challenge for me. I was trying to
Right.
structure it so that the things that are easier to do when I'm doing something else, like analysis or writing, are kind of, I'm hoping to align those with the timing of my schooling so that, you know, I can work on those, because I can't really be in the lab collecting participant data while I'm in school. So
Yeah.
it's a bit of a puzzle how to structure it within your PhD, but hopefully it'll work out. That's the plan.
I'm sure it will. Very, very cool. Yeah.
I did have a question about kind of your path as
Yeah.
well. So I've already kind of mentioned this, but you've switched paths, and I know how you ended up kind of from that control systems path, and your supervisor suggested you look into the biophysics. Is it imaging? Sorry. Yeah, I mean, I know your research is in imaging. But how did you go through that process? Because starting in engineering physics, going into like control systems and switching back, like what was your reasoning for heading back into kind of that med area?
I guess for me it was just a desire to contribute in that medical space. I thought that while the research that I was doing like at Waterloo was quite interesting and rigorous, and the mathematics, I felt like my sort of interest was maybe in something more applied. When you're working, in like the medical space, obviously the things you do has relevance to patients, and to people whose treatment is potentially affected in the long term by the kind of research that you're doing. So I found that quite exciting when I was considering the next move. And so that was the real influence for coming here. And then also, it was, I still felt that my sort of background in engineering and physics was going to be put to good use. And so I found, that what I'm doing on a day-to-day is quite similar, in some ways to what I was doing in my undergrad, and that kind of lots of programming. There's lots of physics involved in MRI, which is quite interesting. So that's sort of what influenced the decision there.
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like I experienced this too, but I mean, when I started my undergrad, when I started my undergrad, I didn't understand why anyone would ever do a PhD. Why would you put yourself through that? And here I am. But I just didn't get it, because I hadn't experienced what research was and what I could get out of academia and all these things, right? So I feel like I had, switches too, in terms of, I thought I was going to finish my engineering degree and probably go into the tech industry or something like that. But yeah, like co-op and just kind of watching how my interests changed, like the more I learned about things, kind of like you said, or where I wanted to make my impact as well, was kind of the deciding factor for a lot of that. Which, yeah, it's interesting how it changes throughout kind of just even like 4 or 5 years of your life. It can be a bit of a shift. Yeah, definitely.
And I guess I saw that kind of reminds me. I saw you had a question there about the sort of fear of missing out of people who had gone. Did you want to talk a bit about that? Or like, what? Yeah.
I can clarify what I mean. Yeah, so I think that's something I have every blue moon. It kind of strikes me when I'm, even when I'm out with friends from undergrad or friends from different parts of my life, and they've finished school and they've been done school now for 3 years, 2 years, 3 years. Some of them, I have friends who, stopped, didn't do education after high school. So they've been in their fields and working for years. And so it's always this kind of this moment of, am I spending all of my 20s in school? This fear of missing out, right? And I feel like just every blue moon, most of the time I'm pretty, happy and content with my plan. And I can always kind of talk myself back and go, okay, no, I know what I'm doing. But yeah, I think that feeling of missing out and that fear of missing out creeps in every blue moon. And I'm in school for my 20s, but watching my friends kind of start work and start their career paths in their lives is like, should I be there? And I was wondering if you kind of had that experience as well, because I know a few of my friends here who are in PhDs have had similar thoughts of like, I'm still in school and it's year 7 or 9 or 12 right. And I'm still here. And it's kind of like this worry, but yeah, I mean, how have you dealt with that if you've experienced it?
Yeah, no, I mean, I've certainly experienced it. Like I have, a lot of friends who, I made friends in engineering during my undergrad, and a lot of them have gone on to, enter the workforce. And so there's certainly like pros and cons to, I think either path. And, I do remember like when I started my PhD going to this kind of seminar and for advice on getting for grad school. And one of the people there was saying like, you'll have to remind yourself of like why you're here, like why you're doing this. Yeah, because it's certainly a long road. So, I think those very like understandable feelings around that. I mean, for me, I guess I just remind myself that, the desire to sort of have a career in research and work in the field that I'm in, like it is, it's very valuable experience, like being able to work underneath a supervisor or somebody who's like really an expert in their field. And there are all sorts of experiences you get as a result of grad school, like kinds of people that you get to meet, and kind of work that you get to do is it's unique. Like it's not necessarily something that you would get anywhere else. And so obviously the flip side is that you're not out in the workforce, you're not making as much money as you would otherwise. But I think it really comes down to a personal choice, and sort of reminding yourself of the reasons that you started in the first place, and like what brought you in can be useful to do, even if it's something that you have to sort of write down and look at every once in a while.
I think that's exactly what I've found too. It's just kind of remember why you're doing it. And then I'm kind of like, oh, okay, I'm brought back to reality now. It's fine. I'm not there, but I mean, for me, it's been like two things. Like the first is just really going, okay, everybody has different paths. And, just because my path is taking me this many years down school doesn't mean it's taking me off the path. It's just a different one. And the other one has very much been just kind of remembering to not, we kind of have this idea in our brains of like school ends and then work and life begins. And I'm not sure that that's quite how it works, No,
I don't think so.
Much more fluid than that. So I think it's been that realization too of like, I'm in my PhD right now, but I'm really enjoying it. I'm still, having the opportunity to go spend time with friends and to do traveling things. And, I'm not, I don't have a 9-to-5 kind of job or anything along those lines, but I don't know. I think just remembering that, it's not this fine line between the end of school and the start of work. It's like, this is also work that I'm doing right now. It's just also in academia. So I think that's also helped me a lot.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's a good perspective to have, like in a way. Yeah, in a way you are working. It's just in a sort of different industry and maybe some peers. I guess I think getting sort of near the end of the questions that I had thought about, maybe I'll just ask, this is sort of going back a few years, but I just wanted to ask about, you had a short placement in France. Was that right? Yeah.
I feel like this is such a funny one because it was in COVID times. So COVID ruined it in a way.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. Just cut short.
Chopped it up. It was I feel like everybody kind of has a COVID experience, like has, it's kind of like remembering what was going on in their life at that time when COVID hit and just completely derailed everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, for me, I was on this like dream co-op placement. I was doing research and just like 45 minutes north of Paris. And I was loving it. Like I was traveling every weekend. I was hitting Norway and Belgium, and I had all these great trips planned. And
Wow.
I love to travel. So this was like the dream. And I remember I was planning to go to Disneyland Paris on March 14th, and everything kind of went crazy in COVID world in Paris before it kind of hit Canada. So it was very interesting for me to like, basically the university told me to come home. They said, okay,
Right.
it's time for you to come back. So we wake up the morning of the 14th and Disneyland is actually closed for like one of the very first times ever. They decided to just close down Disneyland, which now it seems totally probable, but at the time was pretty mind-blowing. And I get the message from the university. So I had to like get on a flight and come home. And what was wild was Charles de Gaulle Airport, which is usually so busy and so bustling. I mean, this was the day the country went into lockdown, so it was empty. Like I've never had it. It was such a strange experience to walk through a completely empty airport to the one flight that I was getting on. And what was even weirder was leaving that, coming home to Canada, and it hadn't hit yet. So it was like nobody here had quite responded. So
Right.
I mean, that was a different experience all on its own in terms of the COVID stuff. But also for me, trying to learn tissue engineering in French was a very new experience. That is my second language. And I've never worked, my brain's never worked so hard as it had to in those 2.5 months that I was there. Trying to keep up with the lingo, and lunch was like a full brain exercise experiment when I had to try to understand what everyone around me was saying and trying to be social. But I mean, I wish it hadn't ended for COVID, but I would like really recommend to anybody taking the time to like, even if it's just for a few months, to find some sort of internship or position abroad and just like get that experience of working in a completely different culture.
So you'd recommend that as a
Absolutely
here.
And I think it was interesting to see kind of how the work day even shifted over there. Like they're very, it's kind of that they have that saying of, in North America, we live to work and they work to live over in Europe. So whereas like they would end their day at 6 and they might have taken a 2-hour break in the afternoon to go do exercise and go for a jog. And it was just kind of this really interesting experience because they were still very productive. And it kind of taught me a lot too about kind of how I can manage my own time in a different way and still be just as productive, but also get a little bit more time to myself kind of thing. So I think, just different cultures, different approaches, different universities. I cannot see a downside to taking some time and working somewhere different.
No, that's great to hear. I think great for other people to hear too.
Did COVID derail your studies at all? Did it?
For me, it was funny. I ended up going back to Vancouver for a few months, like when COVID hit. Because everything went into lockdown in Toronto, and it was just it was a lot at the time, I remember. But thankfully research carried on online for the most part. Like we were able I analyzed patient data, and the patients were continuing to be treated and imaged, of course, and then so I was able to sort of access everything online, which is I mean the value of the internet at that during COVID was really highlighted how useful that is. So so I was not too badly affected by that. I just wanted to ask this question about just in terms of like the experience abroad and stuff. And so it sounds like that would definitely be a highly recommended
thing. It says a lot that it got cut short and ended in such kind of chaos, but I'd still say like I'd do it again, like 100%. It was totally worth it. I think it's just it's a lot of fun, great experience. You learn a ton.
No, that sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I think, those were all the questions that I sort of had prepared. I don't know if there was any thing more that you sort of heard that
I don't
would
think
make
so. I
a good
think,
discussion.
yeah, we've chatted about most of most of the things we'd kind of come up with, but yeah, it was really great to chat with you, and
Yeah, same.
hopefully people who listen to this kind of get some reassurance about grad school
Yeah.
and work-life balance and things like that. Um, yeah, and I'm sure both of us are always open to chatting with people about kind of the decisions we've made and all
Yeah,
those
definitely.
things. Yeah, because I think chatting has been a huge part for me as well of making like these decisions, is talking to people who've made similar ones and understanding
Yeah,
why.
that's really
So
important.
yeah, the Leader Talks is great for that. So yeah, it was great
Yeah.
chatting with you.
Yeah, good chatting, Kenzie, and I'm sure we'll run into each other again at some point soon.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
Yeah.
Hey,
Okay, thanks. You too. Bye.
bye.